Thank you for having us here today, Michael. We really appreciate the efforts that ADI puts forth to get interaction between our dealers and the manufacturers. So I really appreciate this opportunity. So uh, again, my name is Marshall Lorden. I've been with Telguard for about 5 years now, and I cover the Southeast territory. For the past 5 years, I've worked with dealers across the country and around my own territory and trained them on how Telguard's cellular communications technology can be leveraged to generate new streams of recurring revenue. But before I really talk about Telguard, I want to provide a little bit of background and context for Telguard's corporate family. So Telguard is a part of Tellular Corporation, and Tellular is an IoT company. It's got more than 30 years of experience and has produced technologies in cellular, IP, and now even satellite communications. And Tellular has their equipment used in security applications, like what we work with here and what we'll be talking about here today, but also in tank monitoring, fleet vehicle tracking, and over the past 30 years just have had their hands in a lot of different uh, projects and movements. So in 2019, Tellular was acquired by Amatec, and Amatec they're an American global manufacturer of electronic instruments and electromechanical devices, so really high-tech sensors and equipment. And they're headquartered in Pennsylvania, and they have over 220 manufacturing sites across the world. In fact, one of the devices that was used to map out the genetic structure of the COVID-19 virus was actually manufactured by Amatec. So you can kind of see that Amatec, as a global entity, has a lot of a pretty wide range of product offerings. And with this acquisition came new opportunities for Telguard. So not only were we able to, has it given Telguard an international partner in manufacturing, but it's also given us new opportunities to present new security products to the industry, such as the VirAlert 3 thermal imaging camera system. But now, because of those decades of experience in working with network carriers and distribution partners like ADI, and this great relationship that we have with this global technology manufacturer, Amatec, I feel that this really puts us in a position of expertise in cellular communications. And that's what we want to leverage today to our dealers, to teach them about how Telguard has maintained this position of expertise. And to do that, we're always been the first one to come out with new technology, such as when LTE came out, when CDMA came out, and now and other carrier technologies. We've always been adamant about becoming the first, about leading the way, so that way our dealers are getting the best equipment. And at this position, we want to use some of this expertise to train our dealers and how they can prepare for upcoming sunsets. And that's why we've brought our Director of Technical Services, Daniel Rosales, in today. He's been with Telguard since 2007, and he's really, he's my expert. I like to think of him. When I have a question about Telguard or about new technologies that come out, Daniel is one of the foremost people that I trust within the company to give a technical but a understandable explanation of how this is how it works. So what I'd like to do is turn the mic over to Daniel, and he's going to be talking about about the upcoming technology sunsets and how Telguard is going to be able to help dealers move past it and continue growing their companies. So without any further ado, I'd like to bring forth Daniel Rosales.
Thank you, Marshall. So one of the things that Marshall sort of hit on is the fact that Telguard has been doing it for a long time. We've been at it for decades. So we've been through it all. And as you can see in the tagline on the slide here, we've been down this road before, and Telguard truly has. We've been there since the analog days. We've been there through the digital conversion. We've been there as we started killing off the 2G per carriers requests, and this ongoing sunset, technology sunset that continues to happen is something that we are very familiar with. So what we want to present today is not just how Telguard does things, but it's really more about the feedback that we've gotten over the years. Again, we've been through this many times. We've seen dealers do things the right way. We've seen dealers do things the wrong way. We've seen dealers do things in ways that even we couldn't explain why they would wait so long to tackle such an important issue. So what I've really done here is put together all the information that we've gathered over the years from dealers and sort of present it to you in a way that helps you strategize it, not so much anything that's truly innovative, but really just taking information that people have gathered over the years. Trial and error has happened. It has happened. Dealers have gone through the trial and error scenarios. Well, let's take those results. Let's take that information and make sure that you have a winning strategy, a winning sunset strategy. And it really comes down to three important aspects. Number one is understanding. Number two is planning. And last is acting and adapting to everything. So understanding, planning, and acting. So we break it down, these three pillars, if you will, into 5 steps to follow. So part of understanding is understanding the events and the options that you have. Understand what's going to happen, how it's going to happen, and what options you have to deal with that event, with those events. Step 2 is understanding what you have to deal with. What is your 3G CDMA population back in the warehouse? What do you have to deal with as far as your labor capacity? One of the key aspects that we all must keep in mind is that we are in this to make money. We are in this to protect. We are in this to provide a service, but we're also in it to make money, to financially continue to support our employees, to continue to grow the business. So we want to make sure that we understand what we're capable of. Once we have those concepts, once we understand what that is about, we will initiate a plan. We want to make sure we plan to increase perceived value. And perceived value is something that perhaps we don't really think about too much, but it's something that's always there. We're always sort of subconsciously keeping in mind perceived value of the things that we purchase, perceived value of the things that we currently have and that we're looking at acquiring. We want to, after understanding what we want to add, how we want to convey the information to our customers to increase that perceived value, we want to plan a replacement strategy. Who do we contact first? How many units do we want to hit on the first month, on the second month? How much time do we have to achieve the seemingly insurmountable goal of converting all our units if we have that many out there? And lastly, but not least, you want to act on the plan. But the key aspect of step 5, which is acting, is that you have to be prepared. You have to be ready to adapt, because no matter how well you plan everything out, history has taught us that through these technology sunsets, nothing is predetermined 100% to the T. Something is always going to change. Something is always going to happen. And the key of acting on a plan or on a strategy is self-assessment, always figuring out where you stand as it relates to you reaching your goal. So we'll get started with step 1, understanding the events and the options. Do we understand what is going to happen? Do we know what's going to happen? What we do know is AT&T has a 3G sunset that's set for February 2022. Verizon has a CDMA sunset that's set for December 31st, a little bit later in the year in 2022. So both of these carriers are essentially telling us that the finish line for this sunset race to get rid of all these technologies are on those dates, February and December of 2022. So we want to make sure we understand that it's a finish line. It's not a starting line. It's not a date where everything up to that point will be fine and well. It's more or less that the coverage, the outlook for those technologies will be shifting, so that leading up to those dates, that will be the final day where they will support said technology. So a couple of the concepts that we see are frequency farming and bandwidth changes or bandwidth reallocation. So think about it this way, right? You look at AT&T, you look at Verizon, and you just look at any building, just any building, any office building. You're going to have 1, 2, maybe 3 cellular communicators in that building. Capacity for that building maybe in the hundreds. Chances are that of those hundreds, 80 to 90% of them are going to be AT&T or Verizon users. Chances are that 100% of those users are going to have their cell phones working on LTE technology, if not better, now that 5G is getting introduced. So really, within that building, within the geographical region of that building, you have maybe 1 or 2 or 3 communicators that perhaps are using older 3G technology, but you have 200 or 300 of those users that are actually using LTE technology. So from a business perspective, it makes sense for AT&T or Verizon to say, you know what, I'm going to cater to my customers. I'm going to do the 80-20 rule, cater to the most amount of customers that I can with my enhancements, with my improvements. So that is where the 3G sunset comes into play. It's not so much about we want to get rid of it from a business perspective. We want to get rid of the 3G technology just because we want to. Is because we want to make sure from a business perspective that as a carrier, we can take care of the LTE customers. We can take care of the newer generation of phones, the newer generation of tablets, and whatever's coming later down the pipeline. So what does that look like? I'm not going to turn off the 3G technology frequencies right away. I may be looking at frequency farming. I may be looking at the fact that there are some frequencies that both 3G and LTE are sharing today. Well, tomorrow, as I start doing my refarming, I'm going to go ahead and reallocate. You know what? One of those frequencies, I am going to reallocate it, enhance it so that it only works for LTE. Does that mean that I still have 3G coverage in that area? Technically, yes. But now you only have 1 out of the 2 frequencies that a radio could have possibly used. So chances are your signal strength may drop, or you may start getting into these hiccups where you're going to have no service conditions or radio failures every once in a while, because now it's relying on a single frequency to do the work that it used to have before 2 frequencies to do. Eventually, as we get towards the sunset, we're going to be looking at a complete switch off of the 3G frequencies, the 3G bandwidth that's allocated for the 3G frequencies for the 3G radios. So one of the things to keep in mind, and probably an easier example, is to think of it as highways, right? You have multiple highways, and imagine if today a 3G radio is like a car that is allowed in every single highway. But tomorrow we're going to say, okay, no, you are too slow. You're not getting on this highway anymore. You go ahead and use the other highway. Well, that is essentially what's going to happen. Little by little, these different highways are going to be blocking your 3G cars, if you will, are going to be blocked from entering these highways. And you're not going to have that level of access as you did before. And that is what we're sort of preparing to. Not to say that everything needs to happen or everything is going to happen tomorrow, but it's going to happen more often and more frequently as we get closer to the sunset dates. Just to give you an example, Rogers in Canada, Canada's still going through a 2G sunset. And they're advertised specific frequencies being shut off at specific dates to specific time intervals. So it is happening not just in the US, but also in Canada. And part of it is that businesses really do need to cater to the next technology as we keep moving forward. So getting on the current technology, getting on the latest technology as early as possible is always the safest bet to have longevity in the industry. So what options do I have? One of the things that we want to make sure you understand, at least from Telguard perspective, and I'll make this as a general statement, always look to your vendors, always understand what options your vendors have to help you migrate, to help you convert to the next technology. From Telguard's perspective, we know that commercial applications, commercial installations are really the ones that are more labor intensive. So we came up with a radio swap. You're essentially buying this TG7 UBL and you are swapping the board, one old radio for a brand new LTE radio, and that is it. So what does that do? It saves you on the hardware because we don't have to sell you the CAN, we don't have to sell you the connectors and everything else that goes along with it. It saves you on the labor cost. If you can picture what a commercial fire installation would take, having to remove that CAN, having to deal with the conduits running into them, the fact that you can now simply unplug your terminal blocks from the old unit and plug them into the new unit, into the new board once you install it. It saves you the time, which eventually equals money. And another advantage of it is that you keep the continuity of the account history. So whatever issues, problems, changes that happen on a 3G radio, because it's the same Telguard account, just happens to be a different radio, you keep that history together so that when you call into customer service or tech support, we can assist you a little bit better because we know the history of what's been going on in that particular area, that location. So by all means, always talk to your vendors, talk to people like Marshall and the sales team to understand what options you have. Not only that, you also want to take advantage of cost-saving opportunities. Talk to your distributors, talk to your branch managers to understand, hey, what do we have going on this month? I know that Telguard is doing some kind of quarterly sale. I know that Telguard is doing some monthly sales. What do you have? What can you help me out with? So just to give you an example, we have TG1 Express and TG7 UBLs on sale with ADI. Not only that, we're taking it a step further. We actually have a buy three, get one free on TG1 Express units, which also includes Home Control Flex free for 3 months. So these are things that from your perspective, you know what's going to happen. You know what you're going to have to do by the end of 2022 or beginning of 2022, depending on which carrier you're dealing with. You know you're going to have to purchase units. You know you're going to have to purchase replacement boards. Why not understand what you're dealing with? Take advantage of those cost-saving opportunities when they come up and really try to get the biggest bang for your buck that way. So opportunities come up all the time. By all means, contact your branch managers, contact your salesperson, your sales representative, find out what's going on, any big projects that you have, anything of that nature. Let's work with your vendors, whether it's Telguard, whether it's anybody else. Just work with your vendors and kind of make us partners in this conversion process. Also in sale, we also have the Viral Alert 3 that Marshall alluded to. And I just wanted to kind of touch on it a little bit. So we'll do that towards the end of the presentation to just give you a little glimpse as to what it is. I said something that's very current and very much in the news nowadays as far as COVID-19 and some of the temperature screening processes that are happening out there. So step one is understand what you're dealing with, understand what your options are, contact your vendors, contact your distributors, take advantage of cost-saving opportunities. Step two is understand your labor capacity. How much work can you handle? One of the things that we know is that we want to make money. We want to increase our customer base. We want to make sure that we are not putting our own growth at risk for this conversion. The best tool to do that is to get an early start on it. The best way of planning for it is to understand if I continue at my current rate of installations, how many hours can I devote extra outside of what I currently do, outside of my current number of installations and tech calls and service calls? Can I devote 3 hours a week? Can I devote 5 hours a week? Can I devote one technician to just take off for a full day to do installations for this conversion that, generally speaking, it's not going to bring in new business, but it's just going to maintain that customer at the very least, right? So we want to make sure that we understand, and we want to make sure that we also understand that it's not just about the installation part of it. It's beyond that. It's the physical installation is part of it. But before it gets to that point, you got to have somebody calling people up, emailing, text messaging, sending, snail mail notifications, whatever may work to be able to get those appointments set. Appointments change from time to time. So now you have office people basically calling people, confirming appointments, postponing appointments and figuring things out. So I'll make sure you understand how much time you can devote every week or every month to the effort. So think of it as a special project. It's a special project that requires its own timeline, its own set of hours, man hours, and understand what you can handle. How many units do I need to replace? This is another point where you definitely want to be in contact with your vendors. Telguard does a pretty good job at providing you with a 3G CDMA sunset report. It's basically a click away. Once you log into telguard.com, there's an option that's labeled, I believe, 3G/CDMA report, and it'll tell you what units you have that should be replaced. But you want to make sure that if it's not Telguard, that you contact your other vendors and find out, hey, can you give me this report? Can you Can you give me some sort of help in understanding what I need to tackle, what issues, what units I have in the field and where they're located and all of that. One of the things that we also want to make sure is that we take advantage of every opportunity. Anytime you contact a vendor to get a report, you're getting information that you wouldn't normally get, you wouldn't normally have access to. So make sure you use that information. Make sure you reconcile your information. Maybe it was something to where a phone number or an address changed over time, or the owner changed over time, or you're providing a security system for a consumer, and the house was sold to somebody else. So now the owner is a different person. Well, your records may reflect that, but Telguard records may not reflect that change. Well, you have a report in front of you. Take the opportunity to go ahead and make sure you reconcile the records. So from Telguard.com's perspective, it's really pretty straightforward. You log into Telguard.com, you put in your username and password, type it in, same way that you would always go about logging in. And it really is as simple as just going to the right section and getting that report. Now, one of the advantages of what we do is that we keep in mind the fact that the data that you are going to get is something that you're going to use for a specific purpose. So within that report, we actually include information that will come in handy as you start strategizing on how to take care of these customers, or on how to approach them, or the timeline in which you have to approach them. When you export the report as a CSV file to handle in Excel, you'll see that there are a lot of different fields. One of the ones that I want you to definitely keep in mind is the activation date and the registration date. Registration versus activation date. Very important. In Telguard's world, registration date is when somebody goes into the website and puts in the serial number. The activation date is when the installer physically goes out and sends a signal for the very first time for that unit. So effectively, the activation date is how long your customer has had that unit for. So that information will actually help you in adding to that perceived value, or strategizing around the perceived value. So what really is perceived value? Perceived value is essentially not what a unit costs, but what you feel the unit means to you, right? So imagine, if you will, if today I sell you a cell phone today, and you are told that you have to replace it in 1 year, versus somebody else sells you a cell phone and you're told, hey, you're going to have to replace it in 5 years. Even though that both units cost the same amount of money, in your mind, the unit that you have to replace in a year has a less perceived value than the one that will last you 5 years, right? So that is more or less what we're talking about here, perceived value. Now, there are some concepts that you can't really get around. So a unit that has been installed for out there in the field for 3 years, that is the perceived value of that unit. That unit to that customer was 3 years worth of a good working unit. A unit that was out there for 5 years, 5 years worth of a good unit, right? So it's going to be an easier conversation with a customer that had it for 5 years versus the customer that had it for 3 years. So what we want to do is plan to add more to that visit. What can we do during that visit to upgrade the device? Can we do system inspections? Things that will not take a considerable amount of time, and that in some cases, like a commercial fire type of installation, are really just part of what we should do anyway, right? So it's a way for us to sort of promote the added benefits of having us go on site, or maybe just timing it appropriately, right? So we have TG7FSs out there, we have commercial fire systems, we have to do inspections, we have to do things of that nature, where we have to send somebody out there. Let's make sure we plan it so that the perceived inconvenience to the customer is not as bad as having to schedule an extra appointment. Of course, we're always thinking about things that we can add, we can sell. One of the things that we want to keep in mind is you always want to upsell with empathy. Understand that this is not something that the customer wanted to do. I don't know that in any case a customer would be calling you up and say like, hey, can you replace my unit to get the latest cellular technology? I'm willing to pay for it, and I really don't want any extra value out of it. I just want to pay you for a new radio. That's not something that's going to happen. So when you have that conversation, communicating with your customer about what needs to happen because of the technology changes, and because we need to make sure that they're taken care of before the sunset happens, before they see any issues happening. Let's understand that, yeah, there may be an opportunity to upsell. If we're talking residential, there may be an opportunity to upsell on remote arming and disarming with Telguard. If we're talking commercial fire, there may be an opportunity to upsell on the soul path, on the link supervision side of things. But always keep in the back of your heads that it's not a conversation that the customer was willing to have, right? It's something that they needed to have with you because of something that's going to happen. So things that you can offer: complimentary battery checks, system tests. Like I said, pair it up with a scheduled inspection to minimize the impact, because perhaps they were already expecting something to happen. New yard signage, window clings, that always works well with the residential customers. So keep in mind that we want to lessen the burden of having that call. And at the same time, we want to make sure that we tackle everything in a way to where we're always thinking, what does the customer think of this product and however long they've had it? As far as a replacement strategy, you want to make sure that you have hard numbers. It's not a matter of, I want to make sure I replace everything by 2021, by 2022, that's my goal. This is one of those steps where you want to make sure you have hard numbers. You want to make sure you deal with real figures that you can reassess month by month to understand where you stand on reaching your goals. So using the report, for instance, the one that Telguard provides you, or again, contact your vendors, get whatever reports they can hand you. Understand how many months you have until each sunset. Understand how many units you have to replace, and do simple math. I always recommend giving yourself a buffer. Give yourself a buffer, 2 months, 3 months as your goal line. So let's just say if there are 20 months until the AT&T sunset, you want to make sure that the number that you use is perhaps 18 months, so that your goal is to finish everything off a few months before the actual sunset, so that you're always ahead of pace. Same thing for Verizon. So understand how many units you have to replace for each carrier, understand how much time you have for each carrier, and give yourself those goals. Simple math scenario here: 58 units in 20 months. I got to do 2.9. So I have to make sure that I hit 3 AT&T unit conversions every month to keep pace. Same thing for Verizon. In this scenario, in this example, I don't have that many Verizon units. So really what I'm looking at is 0.2 per month. So every 5 months, I got to do at least one Verizon unit to be able to keep pace and make sure I get everything done in time. So for step 4, as far as planning your replacement strategy, you must have hard numbers. All the vendors, everybody you do business with, make sure you get those numbers. You understand what you're dealing with before planning for a strategy. So who do I contact first? And again, it goes back to that perceived value. Who do I contact first? You want to contact first, number 1, the person that is having the most problems. And number 2, whoever has had the unit the longest. Why? Because that means that whoever has had a unit the shortest time, you're kind of pushing them towards the back so that they get a few extra months more with that device, so that the perceived value is a little bit better. So if you have a year-long plan to, let's just say, end your transition by the end of 2021, you're essentially giving somebody an extra year with that 3G or that CDMA unit by asking them to replace it next year around this time frame, as opposed to starting with those people first. So perceived value should be at the forefront at all times. You want to make sure that you tackle the customers with the oldest units first, and that's where the activation information comes into play, right? From the Telguard report, you want to look at the activation date, and that'll tell you how long a customer has had a unit for. So the longer the customer has a unit, has had a unit to enjoy, the better they will receive the news that they have to replace that product. And this is just a quick example of how that would work. You take the activation date, you sort it from oldest to newest, and you essentially figure it out. Now, it's not as simple as saying, all right, I'm just going to go oldest to newest. Let me tackle the top 5. Next month, I'm going to tackle the next 5. And the next month after that, I'm going to do the next 5, and so on and so forth. If it was that simple, we would really be living in a utopian, ideal world where everything goes right. And that's not really the case. So a lot of the times, the people that you contact, they are not going to be receptive to it. They're not going to be able to give you an appointment to be able to do the change out. You're going to have to work on them a little bit more as far as communication. A lot of the times, if it's not an emergency, they won't call you back. They will think of it as a marketing campaign. They will think of it as a sales call. So how do you contact the customers knowing that the customers may not be as receptive to it? This is a part of the strategy where I cannot tell you how to do it, because it really comes down to how you initiated the conversations with the customers. How do you communicate with your customers? There are a lot of dealers out there that will actually exchange text messages with customers. That's just the level of service that they provide. There are some dealers out there that we deal with that do everything over emails, and there are some that don't even bother with digital stuff. They just like to call. They like that in-person visit or that phone call. So whatever avenue, whatever path works best for you to contact and reach out to your customers, that's the path that you want to take as far as contacting them. Keeping in mind that you may not be able to get an appointment. You may not be able to get those 5 units that you're looking at converting on the first month by just calling 5 people. You may need to contact 10 people, 15 people first, and kind of gauge the overall reception to the concept of having a change out a unit. The main thing is no one knows your customers better than you. That's the bottom line. You know your customers, you deal with them, you got their business. There was something that they saw in you that made them go with you for the service. It's that same something, whether it's the charisma you have, whether it's the way you communicate with them, whatever it is, that is what you should use to be able to contact your customers, understanding that this is not something that they're really looking forward to. Step 5 is acting on that plan. So what do you have? You know when the dates are for the sunset. You know that it's not going to be an immediate switch where you can just, where AT&T or Verizon are just going to switch everything off, but everything is going to be working until that point. It's not going to happen that way. And something else, I guess, I could bring up, the environment changes. The environment changes all the time. The environment changes. We just recently experienced an issue with a set of hurricanes, that hit the Gulf Coast. We're talking Houston, Texas, Galveston, Louisiana. So things of that nature, natural disasters, things of that nature will actually speed up the process of transitioning. If you think about it from a business perspective, right? You have 3G towers out there catering to customers. Something happens and those towers need to be physically replaced or physically enhanced in some way because they're damaged, right? So what do you do as a business? Do you spend money in continuing to support, continuing to provide a service that you're getting rid of in a couple of years? Or do you take that opportunity to say, you know what, let me go ahead and send my LTE, my 5G hardware out there. Let's go ahead and convert those towers. Let's bring Louisiana, let's bring Texas back up with the latest and greatest technology. From a business perspective, the latter is probably the way to go, right? So where does that leave those 3G and CDMA units out there? Probably with less coverage, probably areas with no coverage after a natural disaster like that hits. Now, these are, of course, things that weren't in the plans as far as let's change out Houston in August, or let's change out Lafayette or whatever areas in Louisiana in August. But it was something that was driven by a natural act that just prompted something to change a little bit faster than usual. So when you're looking at acting on things, when you're looking at what's going to happen, make sure you understand that sunsets will be coming up. It's not the finish. It's not the start line. It's the finish line. but things could speed up the process, could give it a boost as far as changing those things out, and that would prompt you to act a little bit faster. You have to know what you're dealing with. You have to know what population of units you have to deal with. You have to know how much work you can actually afford to provide for that specific effort. Again, you want to think of it as a special project, and you want to dedicate a certain number of man hours to that project. You have to understand how many units you have so that you can plan and set monthly goals that you can achieve. Once you have the strategy in place, once you know how to contact customers, once you start reaching out and contacting them, you want to make sure that you use whatever tools you have available to you to minimize your time on site. Again, the concept is the same, right? This is not something that an end user wanted to go through. This is not an event that anybody is willingly getting into. It's something that just needs to happen. So the less time that we spend on site, the less inconvenience that we put on a customer, the better it is for everybody. So Telguard.com website has direct replacement tools, for instance, where if you are replacing a board or you're replacing a TG7, even if it's a full unit, you enter the old serial number, you enter the new serial number, you hit the swap button, and all the configuration that the previous unit that you're removing had gets automatically dumped into the new unit. So you don't really have to reprogram anything. If it was working before, it'll work the same way on the new unit. So things like that make it a lot easier. With Telguard, it really is just as simple as you plug in the serial number or the subscriber number for the old unit, for the 3G, the CDMA unit. Once you have that profile, there's an option for you to replace the serial number. You provide the new serial number, and after providing the new serial number, it'll validate and you will essentially just replace it. Once the unit comes online, once you power down the old unit, power up the new unit, and send your signal as you normally would, all the programming changes, the sol path, if you're dealing with commercial fire, the link supervision rates and all of that. If you're dealing with a residential product, the home control flags and the remote arming and disarming features, all of that stuff gets automatically downloaded into the new unit so that you really don't have to spend much time programming or dealing with that aspect. The only thing that you would have to just spend time on is confirming that everything with the new product is working as it was with the old product, right? So you use whatever tools you have available. Make sure you talk to your vendors, understand what is the most efficient way for me to do this. Of course, here with Telguard, we're telling you exactly the tools and the things that we have in play to make your lives easier. By all means, if you have other vendors, ask the same questions. Well, how can you help me? What reports can you give me? What tools can you provide me? What can I do to make this transition easier as far as the planning and also as far as the on-site time? I want to minimize time on site. The TG7FS, I've been talking about the TG7FS as one of those types of installations that are really cumbersome. And I'm just really here showing you what a TG7 UB, a board replacement, looks like. You basically unplug everything, remove the antenna, remove the screws that are holding down the PC board, the printed circuit board, pop in the new board, and just replace all the connections. It really is that simple. Now, one thing that I want to make sure I sort of point out here is that the antenna needs to be changed. And this is going to be true 100% of the time for virtually every installation, regardless of who your vendor is. 3G and CDMA units work on a couple of different frequencies. Your LTE products work on a wider range of frequencies that go beyond what 3G and CDMA units work. So if you're replacing, I'm just gonna talk Telguard. If you're replacing a Telguard unit and you're replacing the board, we're not just giving you the board, we're also giving you a replacement antenna. Why? Because even though that LTE board may work with those two frequencies that it had in common with the 3G or the CDMA product, the LTE boards have a wider range of frequencies that they can work with. So essentially what you're doing is you're limiting that board to only work in a very specific frequency. So you're not really taking advantage of the LTE network. You're not taking full advantage of the capabilities. So when it comes to LTE, make sure, and again, speaking from Telguard's perspective, any LTE accessory that we sell will work for 3G, for CDMA, and for LTE. However, if you had a 3G or a CDMA antenna, it will only work for a very specific set of frequencies on LTE, and it will not work for the remainder of them. So you want to make sure that you always have an LTE antenna at the end of that connection. And the same is true for any other vendor that's using LTE. You want to make sure that the antenna also gets changed. Now, the cable itself that goes from the antenna to the board, if you're extending that antenna, let's just say you're using an outdoor antenna, that cable is not really frequency dependent. So that does not need to be changed. But the antenna at the end of it, it does need to support LTE frequencies, wideband frequencies. Part of the action plan is the fact that we understand that nothing is going to go as we plan. And the earlier you get used to this concept, the easier it's going to be for you to sort of build it into your strategy. You always have to adapt to customer response. The first couple of months are going to be sort of a feel out process, understanding, what works best, what's going to work. Perhaps a couple of the initial conversations didn't go as well. So I'm fine tuning what I'm saying, how I'm talking to customers. Perhaps the approach that I took at first, as far as just sending emails and waiting for responses, maybe that didn't work as well. Maybe it's something where I have to lead the conversation a little bit more clearly. Communication may have been a little bit confusing, right? A lot of the times, if we are really vague as far as the communication, what do we do nowadays? If you don't know something, you Google it. That's basically what it comes down to, right? You see something, you don't understand what it is. Oh, let me Google search what that means. The good thing and the bad thing with the information age that we're living in is that you have access to a lot of information. That's a good thing, and it's also a bad thing because you have access to a lot of information. Some of it could be misleading, some of it could be outdated. So you always want to make sure that you drive the conversation with information, with accurate information. And to that extent, Telguard.com gives you that sunset information that you can point your customers to better understand what the sunset means and how it would impact the technology they're using. We talked about setting up your goals. Set your goals, whether it's 5 a month, 6 a month, 20 a month. Make sure you have a goal in mind, but more importantly, make sure that you assess every month to understand what's working, what's not working, and how much more effort you need to put into that project in the future, right? If you thought you allocated 1 day a week to this specific project and that's not yielding the results that you wanted to, you want to make sure you catch that before you get to the point where you're so close to the sunset that your customers are actually calling you, complaining about items, as opposed to you calling them to give them a heads up of something that needs to happen. So you want to make sure that you always stay ahead of the curve as much as possible. Something that I mentioned earlier, a changing environment. Signal degrades unexpectedly in any area, sometimes caused by natural disasters, sometimes caused by just different population movements, right? A lot of the times it's not just the frequency farming, it's also the bandwidth allocation. If there's only so much, how can I put this? So much connectivity that can happen from a tower. And you have a building that's opening up or an office space that's opening up, or you have houses that are being populated, and all of a sudden that tower went from supporting 20 to 30 to 50 mobile users to supporting double that number. There's a very good chance that the 3G units are going to be capped, so that, hey, you know what, there's not that many of you, so I'm going to go ahead and push it to the side a little bit to make more room to my LTE customers. So things like that could happen, and it's just a changing environment. It's just par for the course. It's just the way that things are. The downside of these things happening is that we are not getting alerted. when these things happen. So we'll get an alert when something major happens. We're not going to get any kind of notification when there's a big opening and then there's a population influx that requires some bandwidth sharing. So we must be ready to adapt. We must be ready to hear our customers and understand if one customer complains, two customers complain in a specific area, you know what? Maybe we've got to shift strategies for this next month. Let's take a look at all those units in that region, in that zip code. Let's take a look at the Telguard report that we have. Let's find out, should we tackle that region next? Hey, call to the customer. We understand there has been some work on the carrier side. We want to make sure we tackle it now before it becomes a major issue. Let's take care of you today. So adapting is always going to happen. It's always going to be a constant self-assessment and review process of what's working and not working for you, as well as what's changing out there from an environmental perspective. The sunset report gives you a better idea of the geographical impact. The sunset report that we provide gives you an idea of who to contact first and how to contact them. Now, just a quick product overview to go over the Telguard offerings that we have. We are essentially really dipping our feet into everything nowadays. We have residential products with a TG1 Express and a TG1B, which also have integrations with Arlo Video and Alexa. Now, Arlo, of course, is part of the offering that we supply through distribution. On the commercial Berg space, we have TG4 and the TG7 products. These are your standard commercial Berg products, and the TG7A, which is the big guy there towards the back, and it's your your grade A anti-vandalism, safe vault bank type of scenario. Commercial fire is something that it has been very lucrative for us, and the TG7FS is probably our flagship product nowadays. And it's your solution to be able to do backup, primary, or sole path communications for commercial fire applications. The TG7 UBL is what I was referring to as a replacement board. It's just an upgrade board that brings you into the LTE world. And actually, the TG7 UBL works with any of the TG7 products. So whether it's the TG7 for Berg or the TG7 for Fire, it works with either one. The TG PEM accessory is actually something that it's fairly new. It's an accessory that allows you to have multiple inputs connecting to the TG7 products. Just think about it this way, just to give you an example. Again, commercial fire being such a hot market right now, commercial fire, you can use a TG7FS connected to a TG PEM accessory, and you can have a fire system. You can have the outputs of a fire system wired into a TG PEM. The TG7FS will translate those inputs into fire alarm, fire trouble, fire supervisory, and you can essentially have a fire system that didn't have a DAC, didn't have a dialer, work with a Telguard unit for remote monitoring. The TG PEM is also a step-down converter that will essentially take in 24 volts DC and convert it down to what the TG7FS can use. So in that scenario, you will not basically need to have an electrician come out and work on a branch circuit or making sure that you have an outlet available or anything of that nature, because now you have a TG7FS running specifically off of the panel. And I believe we're looking at less than 150 milliamps. So it really is almost as consuming as a keypad. Something else that we have on the cellular video side is that we do distribute the Arlo Go products through the channel. The Arlo Go for AT&T and for Verizon. We have both flavors. So look for the Arlo Go with Telguard. And of course, the Videofied SIMs for Residio. So Residio Videofied, and if you're not familiar with those, it's a very neat product that essentially provides a very small video snippet, very much about video verification to the central station. It's very small, very fast, and we provide the service for it. So with these two cellular video products or offerings, if you will, the advantage of going with Telguard is the fact that we do data pooling. So with data pooling, what you're getting is essentially the ability to have the strength of all of your accounts back up each other. So if you have five Arlo Go systems set up for customers, each one of them at 1 gig, for example, if one of your Arlo goes nuts one month and it does 3 gigs worth of data, rather than paying the overage fees for the extra 2 gig, we're going to essentially pull everything together and say, wait a second, that one unit pulled 3 gigs, but did the other four actually pull in 1 gig each? Is there enough juice there to complement what the three gigs that the first one used? If there is, there's a situation in which you may not end up, paying any overage at all. So the power of Telguard in this scenario is really the data pooling. Um, so what it means is the more units you have online, the bigger the safety net that you have with us. Now, something else that I also wanted to talk about is what's coming this fall, and it's really, really around the corner. It's going to be the TG7FP. The TG7FP is a TG7 Fire product. I like to call it a focused product. Its main focus is on soul path. So we get rid of the components that we don't need when we're dealing with soul path. So the TG7FS, for instance, it's a multitasker. It can monitor a phone line, or it can be soul path. It can be programmed either way. Well, in this scenario, we took out the RJ jack. We took out the components that we need to monitor the phone incoming phone line. We're reducing the cost that way. The TG7FP can only work off of a panel, so it only works off a DC. The TG7FS can work either off of the panel or with its own battery and an AC transformer. So what do we do with the FP? Remove all the AC components, remove the battery charger, reduce the cost that way. The TG7FS comes in a metal can because it needs to house that big old battery inside of it. Well, TG7FP doesn't have to do that because it doesn't work with a battery. It works off the panel. So we'll reduce the enclosure. What that means is we'll reduce the size of the box, reduce the shipping costs. All of that really translates to a less expensive unit because we're getting rid of components that we don't need for a very specific purpose of soul path communication. So that is what's coming this fall. And I encourage you to talk to Marshall, talk to your branch managers about the TG7FP, when it'll be available and what the cost would be, and make this part of your sunset strategy as you're moving into replacing. Obviously, we want this TG7 UBL to be your main tool for replacing Telguard products to Telguard older products to the newer products. But the 7FP could be a tool to bring in those new customers and to convert perhaps from other vendors into our line of products if you're comfortable with Telguard. What's available today, and this is where I just wanted to touch a little bit on the viral alert. We've all been affected, impacted in one way or another by COVID-19. So one of the advantages of working under the Amitech umbrella is that we can leverage some of those relationships with other companies that Amitech owns besides Tellular. One of them being Land Amitech, and they have been in business for a very, very long time. Providing thermal imaging solutions for machinery and in this case, human body temperature screening as well. So the Viral Alert 3, just a really quick rundown, what are the advantages of it? Number one thing is that it's got an integrated black body. If you're not familiar with what a black body is, it's essentially just a known temperature. So imagine a thermal imaging system that always has a known temperature to calibrate itself every time it takes temperature. It makes it more accurate every single time. So when you compare the solution that has a black body attached to the thermal camera at the right distance every single time because it's a single mount, it makes it self-calibrating. It makes it accurate every time, as opposed to maybe a hand scanner that doesn't have a black body, or maybe another system that does have a black body, but you have to mount it yourself and you have to make sure it's at the right distance within the right temperature settings and at the right height and whatnot. So it makes it ideal for the different types of scenarios, permanent mounting, temporary installations. If you imagine a scenario in which there's a building that will always have that temperature screening available versus a building where, during office hours, we need to bring out this system in front of the lobby to let people in, but once everything wraps up, you want to put it back in. The fact that it's a single mount makes it ideal for either scenario. It's of course NDA compliant, which once you start digging into the different brands on there, you'll soon realize that a lot of the players out there may not be. So you want to make sure you take care of that. So from a hardware perspective, it's just a really simple, really basic installation. From a software perspective, it's actually even easier. So it really comes down to two aspects: ease of installation and ease of use, right? From an ease of use, which is really what we want to make sure we tackle, is the fact that it uses facial detection to focus in on where to measure the temperature, which makes it more accurate. It gives you visual alerts. It takes about 2 seconds. You basically have to stay in place for about 2 seconds. The screen will turn yellow to tell you to stop moving. It'll turn green when your temperature is compliant. It'll turn red to tell you that you're above threshold. Along with that, you have logs that log pictures, log images. You have other accessories that allow you to do label printing and interface with, other circuitry like normally open, normally closed relays. So there's other aspects to it that you can make it as complex or as simple as possible. From an installation perspective, I can tell you that the physical installation, the hardware installation takes about 5 minutes. It's just a couple of plugs you got to plug in. The software installation takes you about 10 minutes. And really about 5 of those minutes are just waiting for the software to load. So it really is as simple as can be. And that's sort of the mindset that was put into the Viral Alert 3. So I believe that's pretty much all we have to cover here today, Marshall. I don't know if you have anything else you want to add.
Yeah, thanks for sharing all of your really vast knowledge about cellular communications and this industry. I was taking notes along the way. Learn more about options by reaching out to your vendor, to use the knowledge that you gain to add perceived value, make it more than just to upgrade the equipment, to work to upgrade your customers from oldest first. I think that's really important. Using hard numbers, I think, is super important as well, and it separates you from your competition if you have measurable outcomes. And then also be aware of other environmental factors. So those are just some of the things that I gleaned from it. I really appreciate you sharing it with this with us. If you need to reach out to us in the future, here's all of our contact information. There's my smiling face. And if we'd be happy to answer any questions and work with you on your upgrades in the future. But in the meantime, we really appreciate your time today. If you have any questions, please let me know and I'll try to answer them as quickly as possible. But if not, thanks a lot for your time. I really appreciate it.